MDPHP is a cathinone stimulant in the pyrovalerone class. It's been used for a few years as an alternative to substances like α-PVP, α-PHP, and MDPV, though it's often described as less intense than MDPV and α-PVP. There's reason to believe the purity and content of MDPHP batches has been highly variable, sometimes even involving other drugs being sold as it, so it's been difficult to characterize the drug's effects. Since 2018, it's received a bit of misleading attention in the news, essentially being blamed for violent and psychotic reactions, like those previously attributed to other cathinones. Although those experiences are possible and do occur, stimulant psychosis is nothing new. It's been associated with cocaine and amphetamine for decades, and it usually only occurs when excessive doses are taken, especially when mixed with sleep deprivation. The suggestion that psychotic responses are the norm with MDPHP is baseless. If you want to learn more about the drug or view my references for this information, head over to the TDC website page using the link in the description. As with any drug, the most I can do is give an outline of the typical effects. Your experience is not going to perfectly match the description I provide, since there are different ways people can respond to a drug. Among the positive effects are stimulation, increased motivation, mood enhancement, euphoria, increased sociability, increased confidence, and sexual enhancement. The negatives can include anxiety, paranoia, dry mouth, uncomfortable physical stimulation, muscle tension, increased heart rate and blood pressure, a compulsive urge to redose, and restlessness. The relative lack of English language experience reports, combined with people receiving batches of variable potency and composition, has made it difficult to characterize the substance. Typically, it's described as less intense than α-PVP and MDPV, while being somewhat comparable to α-PHP, though users tend to prefer one or the other. While it's technically less intense, that can be beneficial, so which drug users prefer depends on the effects they're after. If you want the greatest euphoria and rush, it's likely inferior, but it can be superior if you want a comparatively more relaxed or mellow experience with a shorter duration. Usually, it's more mood enhancing than amphetamine, 3-FPM, or 2-FMA. It's sometimes preferred to α-PVP and MDPV because it seems to have a lower risk of psychosis, sleep issues, drawn-out compulsive redosing, and scatterbrained effects. Given it's less likely to cause those issues than some of the other cathinones, it's even sillier that it has received so much media attention. Nearly as many English language reports say it's worthwhile as those that say it's not very effective and isn't mood enhancing enough to justify using it. One of the potential factors in this discrepancy are the aforementioned purity and misrepresentation issues. The Polish language and other European reports are said to be more positive, which might be explained by more reliable purity in those regions. However, TDC largely hasn't verified the contents of those non-English reports, and we have no hard evidence about regional purity differences. A lot of the cathinones and other novel stimulants produce a stimulated but scatterbrained state. At common doses, MDPHP seems to preserve cognition relatively well, so it can be used for productive purposes. It can be pretty useful when that preservation of cognition is coupled with greater motivation and task enjoyment. Other psychological effects include general mood elevation, a greater desire to socialize, and a greater interest in sex. While seemingly less compulsive than α-PVP and MDPV, users can still get stuck in a loop of chasing progressively shorter lasting euphoria and avoiding the Comedown. This sometimes leads to binging and sleep deprivation, which can be very problematic and dangerous. If you have self-control issues with stimulants, it's best to avoid MDPHP. At the least, you should strictly plan out how you'll use it rather than making decisions in the heat of the moment. Some users report it's compulsive despite not being euphoric, meaning they get mindlessly trapped in a cycle of use due to the short-lasting benefits from each dose, and because the Comedown is very undesirable. It's common to have increased heart rate and blood pressure, but those changes usually don't cause any distress. One of the potential uncomfortable physical sensations is muscle tension, such as in your legs or around your chest. A couple users have reported feeling like their chest was being tightly constricted, and shortness of breath can also occur with or without muscle tension. It's uncommon to have chest constriction or labored breathing at common doses. At common doses, it causes insomnia for a shorter period of time than a lot of stimulants, so users can often sleep 6 to 8 hours after dosing. The Comedown is typically less severe than the Comedown for more euphoric and compulsive cathinones, but it can easily still include agitation, low mood, reduced productivity, and physical discomfort, like body aches and tension. Even those who really like it often say the best effects only last a couple hours, and they're followed by boring or uncomfortable mental and physical stimulation. The Comedown is worse in a dose-dependent way. The more you use, both in total and the number of redoses, the more likely you are to have an uncomfortable comedown and insomnia. Orally, it lasts 3 to 6 hours and begins working in 30 to 60 minutes. When inhaled or insufflated, the duration is 2 to 4 hours, with a much faster onset of 5 to 15 minutes. It's a pretty short-lasting drug, and its positive mood effects often mostly disappear in an hour or two. The subsequent couple hours are less uplifting, but still strongly stimulating. How comfortable that state is depends on the user and the individual experience. Sometimes the latter half of the effect period is still useful, sociable, and motivational, but some people only experience a fast decline in mood that encourages redosing. After the main effect period, there's at least a couple hours of residual stimulation that causes insomnia, but it doesn't take terribly long for sleep to become possible if you've taken a common dose. During the residual stimulation period, users are frequently in a neutral mood and have little to none of the motivation boost that was present earlier in the experience. MDPHP is a cathinone, and more specifically a pyrovalerone. This means the molecule has a core amphetamine structure with a beta-keto substitution, making it a cathinone, and it has a pyrrolidine ring substitution at its nitrogen atom, making it a pyrovalerone. From there, it includes a 3,4-methylene dioxy group, like MDPV and MDMA. That group is the only difference between MDPHP and α-PHP. There's a small amount of evidence showing alleged MDPHP batches may really be other substances or a combination of drugs. This isn't surprising considering the nature of the cathinone market, which often sources from manufacturers who are of questionable reliability. A sample sent to ecstasy data was shown to contain a different cathinone, MDPT for example, and the subjectively described differences between batches suggest purity issues and misrepresentation might be common. We have even less formal pharmacology information for MDPHP than for some of the more popular cathinones. Given its chemical structure and subjective effects, it probably at least functions as an NDRI, inhibiting the reuptake of dopamine and norepinephrine, and some reports mention relaxing and emotional effects that could be indicative of serotonergic activity, direct binding at receptors, intracellular activity, and other potential actions have not been evaluated. The drug appears to have first been synthesized around 1960, but it wasn't until the mid-2010s that use began. It's been sold through the research chemical market and has been used and promoted as an alternative to popular cathinones like α-PVP and MDPV. It's reportedly more popular in some European countries, such as Poland, than in North America. Sensationalist news reports first began in the UK in 2018, and then in Australia by early 2019. Major news providers have suggested the drug commonly causes violent behavior, like suicide or causing cannibalism, but there is very little evidence to support this. According to these stories, which often actually implicate MDPV, even though MDPHP appears to be the real causal drug, a fairly cheap drug called monkey dust saw widespread use in northern Britain beginning in 2018. Paramedics and police described cases where people supposedly used a cathinone and then tried to commit suicide, became psychotic, or gained superhuman strength that made them difficult to control. Those reports are basically identical to those from earlier rounds of cathinone hysteria triggered by MDPV and α-PVP. There are probably some instances where people have become temporarily mentally ill in connection with a cathinone, potentially making them a threat to themselves and others. This is known as stimulant psychosis, or in some instances excited delirium, and it's best handled with medical attention and a reassuring psychological support. As of 2019, there's essentially no evidence the drug is causing major societal problems. Unfortunately, reality is often contradicted by statements from medical service providers and police, who describe terrifying cases of zombie-like users and dangerously psychotic individuals. Some of those cases probably exist, but we don't have toxicology testing confirming confirming MDPHP is a common cause of these issues. One of the widely shared incidents allegedly caused by the drug involved a man climbing on a roof who then injured himself jumping onto a car. It turns out that case was actually 4 years old, predating the rise of MDPHP, and it was never confirmed to be drug-related, according to Max Daly at Vice. Police in Staffordshire said in August 2018 that they had dealt with 950 monkey dust-related cases in just 3 months, an average of 10 cases per day. In early 2019, BuzzFeed reported there was an Australian case in which a woman used monkey dust and ended up licking the dance floor so feverishly her tongue bled. Other incidents cited by BuzzFeed include users running into traffic, injuring themselves, and jumping off buildings. Most of these cases have not been confirmed as involving MDPHP or MDPV, yet they've been described as drug-related in articles. And once again, psychosis from a stimulant overdose and/or sleep deprivation is not surprising, but it's not a core effect of the drug, and it can be readily prevented with harm reduction. As of March 2019, it's not specifically controlled in Australia or Canada, but it may be considered an illicit analog. It's a Class B drug in the UK, and it's not controlled in the US. Almost no formal evidence regarding its acute or long-term safety is available, so we have to extrapolate from other stimulants. Overdoses can be expected to cause excessively high heart rate and blood pressure, confusion, hallucinations, paranoia, and anxiety, and the mental issues are greatly exacerbated by sleep deprivation and prolonged use. Binging is very risky. Although violence is not the usual outcome with a mild to moderate stimulant psychosis, it's still an inherently dangerous state to be in. Stimulants should never be used in place of sleep. Most of the severe experience reports by users involve prolonged use for upwards of 1 to 2 days in the context of very little sleep. An overdose can be acutely dangerous to the body due to its cardiovascular impact and a higher risk of seizure. Cardiovascular complications like myocardial infarction and stroke are possible, though no case reports describing life-threatening overdoses have been published. The long-term effects are simply unknown. Because there's so little information about its effects, it would ideally be avoided entirely. If it is used, it should only be taken infrequently and at common doses. No fatalities have been reported as of March 2019. Although there's every reason to believe fatal toxicity is possible when overdosed. A 2018 case report described an instance of fetal death temporally linked to MDPHP and α-PHP, which had been taken by a young pregnant female. However, the exact cause of the asphyxia that killed the fetus was not determined. Among the risky combinations are any other stimulants, serotonergic antidepressants like SSRIs, SNRIs, and TCAs, psychedelics, and sedatives, such as alcohol and benzodiazepines. The sedative combination is physically pretty safe and can even be helpful for alleviating insomnia, anxiety, and the Comedown, but using sedatives with stimulants is inherently somewhat risky because they can mask your impairment, making it easier to overdose. Planning out your doses before using is even more important if you anticipate using a sedative at some point. I really can't stress enough that the most dangerous stimulant experiences tend to involve impulsive redosing. You cannot rely on yourself being a good judge of what's safe or not once you're already deep into a drug experience with a substance that can easily trick you into thinking another dose is always the right move. So if you plan ahead to preempt your bad decision making, that's a great idea. The Drug Classroom is a listener-funded resource, so your support is what allows this content to exist. If you want to donate, you can do so through Patreon, PayPal, or Bitcoin. Donation details are available in the description and at thedrugclassroom.com/support. Your support is greatly appreciated, and thank you very much to everybody who's already supporting TDC.